Good evening and welcome to this fourth episode of the Bastani Factor. We're not quite sure what it is. Welcome back. You may have seen some of the fallout to the last episode 2 weeks ago and what I've called Poppygeddon. That's behind us. I'm going to bring, I think, some of the most important stories of the last week, starting with the reason why this show began late today, which is the cataclysm that is South Western Rail and what we saw yesterday. From Waterloo. So South Western Rail, if you don't know, is the primary rail operator for the southwest of England. They take trains from Waterloo to Bournemouth, Weymouth, Portsmouth. And yesterday, there was a huge problem at rush hour. Thousands of people, you can see it right coming up here, further misery. Really astonishing because of overrunning engineering works. And it was around Surbiton. Now, this led to the Secretary General of the RMT, Mick Cash, to demand that Chris Grayling, the Transport Secretary, rarely hear his name anymore, right, to resign. He called it Monday Mayhem. And he said, schedules and budgets are hacked to the bare bones while private operators like SWR, South Western Rail, are left with a free hand to rob the network blind in the name of profit. He said Minister Grayling had been markedly absent. I mean, I even forgot he was the Transport Secretary. Amid a crisis on the railways, adding he should go and he should go now. Now, this is really interesting. And actually, there's a bigger story at work here. It's not just one bad day, a singular event. If you look at the punctuality of South Western Rail, has the lowest punctuality rates in the country. So about 1 in 4 of their trains every day don't arrive where they should. So about 450 trains out of 1,700 trains are late every single day. 74%. Now that's bad, but what's even worse is it's fallen 10% in the last year, which is a really marked drop. 10% decline. Now, I don't think it's much of a coincidence that the new chief executive of the first group, which is who controls South Western Rail, recently opened talks with the Transport Secretary to amend the company's £2.6 billion winning bid to run, guess what? South Western trains running out of Waterloo. Interesting. They want to revise a contract which has gone out to tender, and at the same time we're seeing rapid falls in punctuality, which were already the worst in the country. Now, this may remind you of something that happened in 2009, where the East Coast Main Line, very similar situation was going on. The owners of it, who I believe were Stagecoach, said we can't make money off this. They were losing money. They'd misjudged the contract and what they could do for the money provided by government, and it had to be nationalised by a Labour government in 2009. And I suspect that's what will happen with South Western shortly. Now, what's really important here is to actually assess what happened when the East Coast Main Line was nationalised in 2009. And the statistics on this are just absolutely remarkable. So, let me get this up. The company won 13 industry awards whilst under national ownership in 2012-2013, including that of being Britain's top employer. There was a 4.2 increase in ticket sales year on year. Punctuality went up to levels, quote, not achieved by any operator on the East Coast Main Line since records began. There was a record level of customer satisfaction. And while Virgin on the West Coast received £179 million in revenue support from the government and a £1.2 billion grant, the East Coast had no revenue support and a smaller grant of £980 million. And because they were making a lot more money, they were making more profits, actually, they required, as a publicly owned rail operator, they required less government money than all the private ones. So, great employer, best employer in the country, highest levels of customer satisfaction, rising demand, increased and unprecedented quality of punctuality, making money for the taxpayer. And yet, guess what happened? Of course, it was privatised again, because that's the fanatical ideology we are all subject to. Now, I'm raising this because we're going to see a very similar yo-yoing with a number of other networks over the next few years, and I really would submit that South Western is one of them. So in the next few months, as this begins to play out, they're already trying to revise that contract. I think we need to see political pressure saying, no, we're going to take it into public ownership. And this is a great way, I think, for the left and for the Labour Party to appeal to commuters, middle-class people, let's be frank, in places which historically aren't Labour seats. And if anybody ever says to you, social ownership is a great idea, it never works. You don't need to talk about Clement Attlee. You don't need to talk about the NHS. You don't need to talk about 1945. Just say to them, Google East Coast Main Line. Simple as that. It is without doubt an incontrovertible example of how public ownership is superior in every single way to private ownership. Next story, Boris and the water cannon. This is absolutely brilliant. You know, between 2010 and 2016, the glory years of the Conservatives in government, there were two things broadly, I think, which characterised discussions around them. The first was that whatever their other failings and flaws, they were undoubtedly better than Labour in terms of economic management. They were very fiscally prudent. They were going to bring down the deficit, get spending under control. They could manage the economy in the long-term interests of everybody. The other was that Boris Johnson was a maverick in British politics. And while perhaps he lacked the seriousness of a David Cameron or a George Osborne, his easygoing everyday charm meant he was very likely to succeed Cameron one day as Prime Minister. And how things have changed. We now know the Tories are the biggest basket case for the economy since, well, anybody, and Boris Johnson could not be taken less seriously than he presently is. And yes, we can talk about the duplicity over Brexit, the fact one minute he thought Turkey would join the EU, the next minute it wouldn't. He wanted a customs union, he didn't want a customs union, he wants Canada Plus, he doesn't want Canada Plus. Forget all that. We know it's all about personal ambition. But let's talk about his time and his tenure as Mayor of London. We had white elephant after white elephant. Maybe we can get these up. The first was, of course, the Garden Bridge. We now know that around £60 million of public money was wasted on this unnecessary, ridiculous project. Unreal. The Garden Bridge. The next one, the Emirates airline. I've never even seen this thing. It's not an air carrier. It's what are these things called? Look at this. This isn't a ski resort, people. This is the Millennium Dome. Again, tens of millions down the drain. So we're talking about £120 million by Boris, literally wasted for nothing. £120 million for nothing. And by the way, you know, a number of issues afflicted London during his time as mayor, okay? Homelessness, falling home ownership, flat wages. But he couldn't really do anything about those. He was the mayor. He's got quite limited powers, right? This is the stuff he could do, the symbolic stuff. And guess what? He shat it all down the toilet. Finally, yeah, it's fine. Finally is the issue of water cannon. Now, this required less money. Fine, we're not talking tens of millions of pounds. But for my money, this is without doubt the most egregious example of this guy shitting away public funds. So these three vehicles were bought from the Germans in 2014. We paid £85,000 for these three vehicles. They had to be modified to make them roadworthy, carbon emissions, new radios, new kit. Overall, they cost £322,000, not including insurance. £322,000. The only problem was, soon after they were purchased, Theresa May, who was then Home Secretary, said it was illegal to use them in England or Wales. Wow, that's kind of interesting. I mean, that would make them, you know, completely pointless. Of course, it was a political gesture by Boris Johnson in the aftermath of the 2011 riots. I mean, it couldn't have worked out more badly. So anyway, these three water cannon, unused for 4 years, have been sold. Would you like to know how much they've been sold for? Bought for £85,000. Total cost was £322,000. Guess how much they've sold for? Take a guess. £11,000. £3,600 each. They've been sold for scrap to a company in the Midlands. Because nobody wanted to buy these pieces of junk for 4 years. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Boris Johnson thinks he can negotiate a better Brexit than Theresa May. This is a guy that bought three 25-year-old vehicles he then legally couldn't use, and then nobody else was as stupid as him to proceed to buy them for the next 4 years. So we've got £11,000 for these three vehicles. That might sound like something. It's 3 or 4%. Okay, better than nothing. Well, guess what? Insuring them for the 4 years costs more than that. unbelievable. Only Britain's media could elevate such a ridiculously idiotic man as Boris Johnson. I mean, the guy couldn't run a casino, a nightclub, a restaurant, a bath. And yet he was at one point the favourite, the odds-on, to be the next Tory Prime Minister. Unreal. Sadiq Khan, quote, "For too long," I mean, this is a Sadiq Khan kind of vanilla quote, he's being nice, he's being kind. "For too long, London taxpayers have had to bear the brunt of Boris Johnson's appalling botched water cannon deal. This has been another waste of taxpayers' money by Boris Johnson. Londoners continue to live with his vanity." Now, for me, as well as the fact it shows that Boris Johnson negotiating a better deal than anyone is clearly fatuous nonsense, it also tells you actually how weak and insipid and ridiculous and stupid the leading layer of Tories are beneath Theresa May. I've always said this. David Cameron, for all his faults, was an effective political operator. He was capable of winning a general election. I've always said that the big beasts of the Conservative Party, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, not one of them is capable of winning an electoral majority. And if this guy, who is clearly, patently thick and useless, is the leading Conservative of his generation, I mean, the party has problems, right? But you didn't need me to tell you that. Final story before we get onto the questions. International Men's Day. Now, I think this might ruffle some feathers because every year it changes. A few years ago, International Men's Day, you had the sort of rad femmes, kill all men hashtag. I don't agree with that. I think it's kind of stupid. I mean, grow up. But at the same time, I have very, very deep problems with International Men's Day. I'll tell you why. How many people are there in the world? 3.5 billion men? 7.5 billion people generally. So we're talking 3.5 to 4 billion men. What interest do these 4 billion men all have in common, universally? None. None. I'm hugely critical of something like International Women's Day, liberal feminism, but at least all women are subject to patriarchy. With men, the most powerful people in the world, universally, are men. And yes, some of the weakest, most vulnerable people in the world are men. So tell me what somebody like Philip Green, as a man, has in common with a homeless guy on the streets. And by the way, 86% of rough sleepers in Britain are men. Are they connected by virtue of both being men? I mean, I really doubt it. And then people will come back and they'll say, well, look, Aaron, typically, you're being problematic, okay? You're saying that this is a waste of time, that there aren't clear, decisive issues that afflict all men. They would look at suicide. They would look at workplace injuries. They would look at shorter life expectancy. And in each case, I would say, look, the issue here is not the fact they're men, it's the fact they are working class men. So let's start with, and I've not got my notes here, so I'm going to, sorry to Gary for the images, you have to get this up. Let's start with the issue of life expectancy. Yes, almost in every society on earth, I think with the exception of one country in the West Indies, maybe Grenada, women live longer than men. But actually health inequality by virtue of economic status is a far bigger determinant of how long you're going to live. So in the UK, I think in 2010, the men from the wealthiest areas would live 9.1 years longer than men from the poorest areas. By 2015, that had gone to 9.2 years. It's a similar figure, it's between 6 and 7 years for women. So you tell me, as men, how one guy who lives in South Kensington, who lives on average, he's statistically likely to live 10 years longer than somebody who's born in a council estate in Glasgow. You explain to me how, as men, they're both afflicted by the issue of having a statistically lower life expectancy than a woman. They don't. It's an issue that affects working class men. Similarly, if we talk about workplace deaths, yes, men are far more likely statistically to die at work. Why is that? It's not because they're men, it's because the jobs and industries they're in tend to be filled by men. So what are they? Well, the biggest killers in this country at work are things like agriculture, construction. Refuse collection is one, we'll get this up. Refuse collection, 20 people, according to the Office for National Statistics, died in refuse collection at work, 20, between 2010 and 2016. 20. Do you know how much those people earn on average? £17,500 a year. Now, It's the same actually with all of these other jobs. Construction's not particularly well paid either. Roofing, scaffolding. Those people in the most precarious industries also see higher levels of workplace fatality. This is not a men's issue. This is a workers' issue. You need workers' safety. So again, the prism of men rather than employment and being a worker, I think is an accurate one. Finally, and this is not as clear and decisive as the other two, I think with workplace mortality, I think with life expectancy, the prism of men as a universal subject is very mistaken. People can talk about mental health. We know that the leading killer of young men in this country is suicide. And while suicide has been falling, really, it's actually at its lowest level since 1981, because we've done so well at eliminating all other forms of death for young men, it's now the leading form, like I said, the leading killer of men. I think actually maybe for men into their 40s, 50s is suicide. We also know that they're very likely to be afflicted with a range of mental health issues. But here's the thing, and let me get this up because this is on my Google Doc here. Here's the thing. Mental health is not a gender issue necessarily. So according to where is this? Where is this? This is great. Here we go. Gary, if you can get this up, to be very, very useful. Yeah. According to the Lambeth Collective's Black Health and Wellbeing Commission, black men are 17 times more likely to be diagnosed with serious mental health issues. In 2013, the Gay Men's Health Survey found 3% of gay men and 5% of bisexual men attempted suicide that year, compared to 0.4% of heterosexual men. So if you're a bisexual man, you're 20 times more likely, according to that data, 20 times more likely to commit suicide than if you're a heterosexual man. Now, I'm not saying cis-het men have it all. Right? I'm not saying that, because you may be a person of colour and you're statistically far likely to suffer from mental health issues. You may be working class on top of it all, and therefore statistically more likely to die at a younger age or suffer a workplace accident. So if you're an LGBT black guy who's working class, yes, you're in deep trouble. Now, I don't mean to get all kind of woke and intersectional, but analytically, that's absolutely the perspective that should be adopted here, no? The issue in terms of addressing all of these problems is not talking about how men suffer from certain issues. It's talking about how gay, LGBT, black and working class men suffer from certain issues. Hugely, hugely important. So let's take some questions. And I think, on the International Men's Day stuff in particular, I find that, I think it's I don't like to use this. I'm hesitant to use the word often. Identitarian politics, absolutely the worst iteration of it. I don't like when people say, well, this is because they're black or brown or white, unless the data shows it. But International Men's Day, the most powerful, oppressive people in the world are men. So I don't quite understand what they, as oppressors, share with the oppressed. Maybe you can explain it to me. Question time. The suicide rate of forces vets since Iraq, Afghanistan is scandalous. No UK figures, but over 60,000 American veterans have taken their lives. Absolutely true. There's data from 2010. Excuse me. There's data from 2010. I don't know if it's continued through to today, but more armed forces veterans committed suicide, I think, in 2010 than died in Afghanistan and Iraq. That was the real war when they came back. It was here, in their heads, which is why I tried to address this issue 2 weeks ago, rather. You can wear the poppy all day. You can have a pepperoni poppy pizza and put a poppy on the Cookie Monster on the one show. But if the guy you're walking past on the street has PTSD and can't sleep at night because he sees the most disgusting and disgraceful things, and he was sent to fight a war to consolidate American empire by the most pernicious, evil prime minister we've had in this country in my lifetime, I think, Tony Blair, purely by virtue of the Iraq War. People can talk about Thatcher. 1 million Iraqis died. There are kids being born in Fallujah today disfigured because we used depleted uranium on these people, radioactive substances. And so, again, like I say, you need an analysis which goes beyond masculinity, because those men have really been screwed over. The men of Iraq have been screwed over, not to mention, obviously, children and women. But what do they share with Tony Blair and George W. Bush? Absolutely nothing. I find it hard to sympathise with military veterans. Well, you can say that about anybody, can't you? You can find it hard to sympathise with anybody. I don't. I mean, I can imagine having friends like that. Think about it. A working class straight white guy is going to find it hard to sympathise with a black trans person. Is that an excuse for them not to try and do so? I don't think so. Aaron, found your experience on Matt Ford's show very interesting. How did you find Ford as a host? He can be a bit snide at times. I really liked him. Very sweet guy. I have no problem with people who I politically disagree with. If they're polite and if they have criticisms of you and they say them to your face, great. What I can't stand is people when you meet them in TV studios or on the radio and they're very pleasant, very polite, very cordial, and then you see them chatting shit about you on Twitter. For me, I have less respect for them. And actually, this happened with Matt Chorley at the Times, who was saying silly stuff on Twitter, and he was so nice offline. It makes me question his authenticity and faith in himself as a journalist. Because somebody, when they do that, to me, it's like you're disrespecting yourself. But that's not the case with Matt Ford. He was very, very pleasant. Aaron, what shouldn't be nationalised? Okay, what should be nationalised? Areas where we have market failure, things that tend to monopoly, water, energy, education, natural resources, housing, healthcare, and public goods, things we have to have, right? They absolutely should be nationalised. I talked about this on the Matt Ford show. I view the things I want to see as actually quite liberal. I think everybody is uniquely placed to determine what they want to do with their lives. The point is, for liberal ends, you need socialist means. Liberal means of private property fanaticism, don't touch what I own, but if you do, that's evil, doesn't allow everyone to do that. Now, if we really believe everybody has the right to be who they want to be, then surely they must be given the resources to allow them to do that. Okay? So clearly those resources should be in public ownership, I think. And then in addition to that, like I say, the stuff that tends to monopoly, you could even say Facebook and Google in the 21st century, that too. Then we can have a conversation about the stuff that, should or shouldn't be in the private sector. Personally, I'm happy with that. But guess what? It's far more extensive than what we presently have. International Men's Day, guys. Come on. I want to rile some people up. Is the uniting of feminism, anti-racism, and the working class movement imperative for the left to succeed? Yes and no. I mean, I would say that I wouldn't even say feminism and anti-racism. I would say the working class movement necessarily has to be feminist and anti-racist. Because these people are working class. I know it wasn't cool to say, but when Caitlyn Jenner did the interview with Vogue, and it was like, Caitlyn Jenner, she's so great. I don't give a fuck about Caitlyn Jenner. I don't care less. I hope she has a wonderful, happy life. But fundamentally, Caitlyn Jenner isn't the kind of trans person who's going to have their life completely fucked up by capitalism. Don't dislike her. I'm really happy that we're in a world where Caitlyn Jenner can be who she wants to be and she can publicly display it and a print publication will publish it. That's great. As a progressive, I don't really care less, really, because that's 0.01% of the trans population in the world. Aaron, are you a cat? This is a great question. Best question so far. Are you a cat person or a dog person? Or both? I tend towards cats, but like all animals, really. I'm a dog person, but I do like friendly cats because they're so rare that when I meet one, actually, I really like them. So we've just moved, my partner and I, and a cat came into the kitchen the other day and it started investigating the house. And I took to the cat because for me, this isn't how cats normally behave. So I thought, as you say in Italian, he was a bit particolare, a bit of a character. So dogs generally. I love Dachshunds, I love pugs, Frenchies, but sadly they get kind of fucked up. So one of my great hopes with genetic editing is that one day we can have Dachshunds who don't need to have little hind wheels by the time they hit 8. Or pugs that can breathe without sounding like an asthmatic vampire. Fingers crossed. What about Larry the Cat? Don't give a fuck. That's not journalism. The fact we even know who Larry the Cat is ridiculous. Aaron, any opinion on the recent Andrew Marr reaction? Also, how does the BBC justify employing Andrew Neil? Great tweet by Matt Zarb. He said, Richard Keys and Andy Gray, Neil and Marr are the Keys and Gray of the BBC. I think that's probably true. I really don't have that much interest anymore in attacking John Humphreys or Andrew Neil or Andrew Marr. I have far more interest in building the alternative because I think through the power of example, these institutions will either crumble or adapt. So I'm far more interested in the alternative. That said, what Ma was doing at the weekend was crazy with Shami Chakrabarti. Absolutely crazy. And Andrew Neil's tweet about Andrew Cadwallader, we all say stupid stuff on Twitter, and it was at 3 a.m, so he's probably pissed. But just apologise, just apologise. So, yeah, in my opinion, they shouldn't be at the BBC, not because I want them banned, just because they don't reflect the general public. It's really amazing. I look at panel after panel after panel, and if I highlight this on Twitter, people say, well, it's because you want to go on this or whatever. I don't really care. Often when people get in touch with me to do something, I'll give them somebody else's number. I really don't care. But what you see on these panels is everybody's over 45, over 50. And people talk about the white thing, they talk about the male thing. But it's really interesting to me how few young people there are on the BBC, how few young columnists there are. And when I say young, I don't mean 18. I mean 45. I mean 40. And we've had this weird moment, really, in the decade following the global financial crisis, where people who are now in their mid-30s are treated by the establishment as kids because they weren't allowed to enter that establishment. We had a break, didn't we? Which we're still yet to overcome. So I have an issue with them, but that's because I think the BBC's journalism could do better. And I'd like to see other kinds of people there. I think Emily Maitlis, I don't really like most of her stuff. I think she'd be a darn sight better than Andrew Marr. Much better. What are your views on what Owen Smith said on Twitter today? No idea. Owen Smith's not a variable. James Butler to replace Humphreys, Neil and Marr. That would be great. James Butler absolutely should be doing BBC Radio. Number one issue Labour can help. Here we go. Hold on. The comments are coming quick and fast, guys. Hit the thumbs up. Go to Twitter. Share this. Say, oh my God, Bastani's running his mouth again. Aaron, are we at risk of abandoning the discourse around masculinity to the right if we don't engage with it seriously? The way we engage with these people isn't through the discourse of masculinity. It's through the discourse of economic self-interest and collective solidarity. So I think a great example of this is, for instance, one of the arguments around football firms. Why did they fall apart in the early 90s? Yes, you had reform, legal reform. Thatcher and John Major destroyed football hooliganism in this country through a range of measures. But there's a really strong argument that says once you had the widespread use of ecstasy, once you had rave culture, literally something in these people's heads changed biochemically. And there's an argument there. And I think, you don't neuter those kinds of communities or ideas through adopting the frame necessarily. You need to say to somebody who's like, I'm a man's man, yada, yada, yada. Like, what do you want to do with your life? Well, I enjoy working out, which is what a lot of these communities do. I love working out. Okay, how often do you get to work out? What kind of gym do you work out in? Okay, well, I work out 5 days a week in a gym and it's kind of shit and it's always busy and I can't use the machines I like. Okay, great. So this is something that's really important to you. Why don't we build a society where everybody works 4 hours a day and they can do what they like? And the facilities available to them are so good that they don't need to wait around. Oh, that would be great. Let's call it socialism. What else do you enjoy doing? Oh, I like hanging out with my friends drinking. Okay, well, if you're working 4 hours a day and let's say we'll have a 3-day weekend as well, you could do more of that too. Oh, great. Wow. Where do I sign up? Well, you need to be an anti-capitalist and resist the status quo. Okay? That's how I would engage with them, personally. Maybe I'm full of shit, but the idea of masculinity... Do you know who the biggest avatar for this stuff is? He did an article today in the Daily Mail. Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan is now the avatar of heteronormative masculinity in this country. Now, if I was on his side, I'd be like, Piers, look, shut up. We need to get Idris Elba or something. You're really not the best spokesperson for this. I don't know if you've looked in the mirror recently. You don't look that great. Maybe think about stopping it. So, no, I'm not that worried about it. If this is the cultural spokesman for these people, no. Aaron, your PhD story was very inspiring. Helped me when I had a severe depression and severe anxiety when doing my MA dissertation. My PhD story. Oh, yeah. Well, that's great. It's on a Medium blog. I'm sorry to hear you suffered from depression and anxiety. I went through something similar. Broke up with my girlfriend. She shut me out. It was very EastEnders. And then found out my mum was very sick after that. I had 6 months to write my PhD. and I felt absolutely shit. But I got through it and wouldn't change a thing. So I'm glad it sounds like you're doing similar. Michael. We're going to take a couple more. You reckon boxing combat sports can provide a more structured, focused outlet for male aggression, testosterone? I mean, are men that aggressive? I mean, women are aggressive too, right? There's a great woman on Instagram, I follow her. I can't remember her name now. She's a powerlifter. She's hench. I mean, she's probably on gear, but the idea that she's, disposed to doing different things to men is questionable, isn't it? But in terms of getting the focused outlet, yeah, I guess, I mean, when I was a kid, I used to love going to the gym and pissing about. I think it certainly needs to be structured. Absolutely. Combat sports I have no problem with. I know that some bits of the left want to ban boxing. If two people consent to it, I literally don't give a fuck. With children, obviously, it's slightly different. You need to cover men's issues to capture the audience. Use the term mixed economy too, not ANCAP or socialist. The words have become toxic. How have they become toxic? If you look at the data, actually, many young Americans view themselves as socialist. So how's that toxic? How's Jeremy Corbyn winning 40% of the vote? He was just polling 65% of 18 to 24s last week. How's that toxic? It's not. You need to be honest with people up front. What's more, they recognise the problems that confront us in the 21st century are gargantuan. So if you're offering, to the contrary, tiny, iterative, incremental steps, people know you're chatting shit. Whereas if you say, look, climate change is really bad. We need to completely decarbonise our society in 25 years. I'm afraid we're going to have to retrofit all homes, make them zero carbon, energy insulated. We're going to start, by the way, with over 60s because they're statistically more likely to die from the cold in winter. We're going to insulate 4 million homes, which was in the Labour manifesto last year, within the next several years. That's what you say. You don't need to say, well, this is where the sort of Democrats and the Labour right fall apart. Well, we'll get the market and we'll make sure there's this one tax measure for companies and they'll pay slightly less national insurance. And on the supply side, we'll make this with corporation tax to incentivize it. Just shut the fuck up. Big problems require big solutions. Otherwise, people aren't interested. I'm going to take 2 more questions. Aaron, do you have any thoughts on neurodiversity, neurodivergence? I actually don't know enough about this. And it's something Novara hasn't really engaged with enough. Last question. Here we go. Oh, libertarian socialist future. Is it true that most misogynists are simply ignorant, horny adolescents? I mean, they're not just adolescents, but yeah. Will most give up their stupid beliefs when they get into their 20s and mature? I mean, I find it... I mean, maybe, again, you sometimes have to get outside your own head. I find it hard to think that a man could have a child. And I hate this meme of, I have a daughter. But surely that must change people's, engagement with the world. I was a hugely different person at 16. I was an arsehole. I mean, most 16-year-old boys are, I think when I talk to sort of younger women, it's a great tweet. You've got to think of this like an unpaid internship. Maybe just apply to the paid job straight away. Just bypass these guys in their teens, early 20s. Or maybe not. Maybe it could be quite sweet. But men are very different as they get older, and there's absolutely some truth there. But of course, some keep those behaviours and characteristics past their 20s, sadly. I'm going to take one more question. Come on, guys. Okay, last one. I think to capture the men, you need to be more libertarian, pro-startup business. What are you talking about? What's libertarian about startups? I love small business. Novara's a small business. Are we libertarians? We're communists. Actually, there's a bit on this in my book called Venture Communism. So, Sam says, what a load of shit. What do you disagree with, Sam? I mean, is that a question? What do you... Be more specific. What do you disagree with? Libertarians and morons. Okay, agreed. I don't need to hide this guy. How can you love small businesses and be a communist? Come on. Okay, so in communism, we would abolish things produced for exchange value. We would have things produced for use value. Small businesses, no. Worker-owned co-ops, 5 or 6 people, exchanging things on a market with the absence of financialization, with the absence of large circles of credit seeking to render profit from productive capitalism. Yeah, I mean, that's not radical. Proudhon says that. He was an anarchist. So communism, I view as a free association of producers. First and foremost, what does that mean? It means the state provides a bunch of UBS, as I said earlier on. You want liberal ends provided through socialist means. So health, education, transport, information, housing, taken out of commodity circulation because these are human rights. Absolutely. And then the other stuff, ideally we would socialise capital markets so we can fund worker-owned alternatives to what we already have. The Preston model is very good on this. Believe it or not, as the last 3 chapters of my book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism is incredibly boring. And it talks about very sensible ways of proceeding from where we are to where we want to go. Is Novara a worker-owned co-op? Nope. It's not even making a profit. Guess what? I'm not even a director. So if you're going to throw the John Landsman shit, ain't going to work. I'm an employee. Gary's my boss. People don't know that. Finally, is Felt going to be an audiobook? Give the people what they want. I might get James to read it. Wouldn't that be good? But then he might have quite a dismissive tone for things he disagrees with. So it's a difficult one. I don't really want to read it myself. Okay, I think we'll call it quits there. That was great. Should all but drugs be illegal? No, they shouldn't. No. Heroin, crack, very bad. Pretty much anything that grows naturally probably should be, right? If not heavily regulated. On that bombshell, I'll see you later. If you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button. We're fortnightly at the moment. We want to take it weekly. Gary can't stand me, so we need to get somebody else to come in sometimes to do the streams and so on and so forth. To make that happen, we need more cash. We need your support. So as well as subscribing, as well as hitting the thumbs up, consider going to support.novaramedia.com to help us build a new media for different politics. Nobody is going to do it for us. And yes, I love slating Andrew Neil, Andrew Marr, John Humphreys, but we have to build the alternative instead. Help us do it. So I'll see you again in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.